September 26, 1999. The day Gladys Ricart's future died. It was her wedding day. With a white dress and dreams of forever. Her family couldn't hide their excitement. And then, her tragic death got captured on camera. Her family and fiancé watched. It was too late to save her. A gun was raised. A finger pulled the trigger. The dress that was supposed to symbolize love, drenched in blood. A wedding turned into a crime scene. A celebration turned into a nightmare. Her final breath was stolen in broad daylight. This isn't just a murder. This is systematic violence. A woman's life erased. Because one man couldn't accept a no? It was cold, calculated and brutal. Close your eyes and feel her terror. Her final moments. The second before everything stops. This is Gladys Ricart's story. A story that screams for justice. Gladys Ricart should have been here today. She should have been celebrating anniversaries. She should have been laughing with her loved ones. She should have been living the life she chose. But choice was ripped from her hands. Her story stained in blood. Her dreams silenced by a gun. Pulled in selfishness. Pulled in obsession. Pulled by a man who thought love meant control. But her name will not be forgotten. Her story will not disappear. Because we are here to tell it. We are here to uncover the truth. To give voice to those stolen too soon. To shine a light into the shadows where monsters hide. And to make sure this never happens again. To every one of our subscribers, thank you. Thank you for standing with us. Thank you for seeking justice. Thank you for refusing to look away. Because of you, Gladys Ricart's story will never be erased. And if you're new here, welcome. If you believe in justice, in truth, in making sure no victim is ever forgotten, you're in the right place. Want to uncover more shocking true crime stories? Subscribe now. Turn on notifications and like this video. Because every story matters. Every victim deserves to be heard. By subscribing, you amplify victim voices. Demand justice. Expose the truth. One click, one share, can change everything. Before she became a headline, before she became a tragedy, before her name was whispered in grief, Gladys Ricart was simply a woman in love. She was bright, hardworking. A woman who had built a beautiful life, brick by brick, with determination and grace. A Dominican American living her dream. She had a good job. She had a strong community. And she had a heart full of love to give. She believed in romance. In the magic of fate. In the kind of love that was gentle, safe, and lasting. But love, real love, is never meant to come with fear. And when she met Agustin Garcia, she thought she had found her forever. She thought she had met a man who would cherish her, protect her, and build a life with her. She was wrong. Agustin Garcia was everything a woman was supposed to want. Successful. Wealthy. A man of power and influence. In the Dominican community he was known. Respected. Admired. To the world he was charming. To his business partners he was shrewd. To his friends he was generous. But behind closed doors, to Gladys, he was something else entirely. Controlling. Possessive. A man whose love came with chains, with conditions, with rules. At first it was intoxicating. The way he showered her with attention. The way he called her constantly, telling her he couldn't stop thinking about her. Love bombing they call it. An avalanche of affection so overwhelming, so intoxicating, that you don't see it for what it is. Control disguised as devotion. Then came the small requests. Don't wear that dress. I don't like how he looks at you. You don't need to go out tonight. Stay with me instead. And then the bigger ones. I don't like your friends. I don't like your job. I don't like you talking to other men. Each demand was disguised as love. Each restriction was whispered as protection. Each warning was masked as care. And like a slow-moving storm, the intensity grew. The mood swings became violent. The love turned into obsession. The man she thought was her protector was the one she would need protection from. There are always signs. But love can blind you. When he grew angry, he told her it was because he loved her too much. When he showed up unexpectedly, tracking her every move, he said it was because he couldn't bear to be away from her. When he blamed her for his outbursts, for his jealousy, for his rage, He said it was because she was the only thing in his world that mattered. Gaslighting. Manipulation. Control. Gladys tried to explain it away. She tried to rationalize. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe he was just passionate. Maybe this was love. But love should never make you feel small. Love should never make you feel afraid. And then the threats began. If I can't have you, no one will. A joke, she told herself. A moment of anger. He didn't mean it. He couldn't mean it. But he did. And when she finally found the courage to leave, he snapped. She chose happiness. She chose freedom. She chose a man who treated her with kindness, with patience, with respect. James Preston. The man who would have been her husband. The man who was supposed to stand beside her on her wedding day. The man who was supposed to be her future. Agustin Garcia saw it as betrayal. The woman he once called his love was walking away. She was slipping through his fingers. She was becoming something he could no longer control. And Agustin Garcia could not let that happen. So he made a choice. A choice that would turn a wedding into a crime scene. A choice that would leave a bride bleeding on the floor. A choice that would turn love into murder. For the first time in years, Gladys Ricart felt free. Love, real love, had found her again. Not the kind that suffocates. Not the kind that isolates. But love that breathes, that nurtures, that makes you feel safe. James Preston was nothing like Agustin Garcia. Where Agustin controlled, James reassured. Where Agustin demanded, James respected. Where Agustin's love felt like a cage, James' love felt like an open sky. And in his arms she found peace. They fell fast, but it was real. Every laugh, every touch, every quiet moment of understanding between them was proof. This was how love was meant to feel. And so they made a promise. A wedding date was set. Invitations sent. A dress chosen. Their future only weeks away. Gladys was ready. She had left the past behind. She had let go of the darkness. She had moved on. But some ghosts refused to be buried. Somewhere across the city, a man was unraveling. He had lost before. Women had walked away. But never like this. Not with a wedding invitation in the mail. Not with another man stepping into his place. Not with her smiling in photos that should have been theirs. Gladys was supposed to be his. And yet, here she was, laughing with another man. Slipping into another man's arms. Planning a future that did not have his name attached to it. Agustin Garcia did not know how to lose. So he decided he wouldn't. First it was just thoughts. Dark, violent, obsessive thoughts. Then it became actions. He hired a private investigator. Someone to watch her. Someone to follow her every move. What time did she leave the house? Where did she go? Who was she with? The investigator reported back. Gladys was glowing. Happy. Unbothered by the past. Living a life that did not include him. And that was the final betrayal. Agustin could feel the anger, the bitterness, the humiliation wrapping around his throat, choking him. She would not get away with this. And so he made his final purchase. A gun. 5 days before the wedding, Agustin Garcia walked into a store and bought the instrument that would make sure Gladys Ricart never said, "I do." With every bullet he slid into the chamber, he made a promise of his own. She would not belong to another man. She would not walk down that aisle. If she would not be his bride, she would be no one's. The night before a wedding is filled with anticipation, with joy, with laughter. It is the calm before the greatest storm of love and commitment. For Gladys Ricart, it was all of that and more. But for Agustin Garcia, it was the beginning of the end. He hadn't slept in days. The rage was eating him alive, clawing at his insides, whispering the same thought over and over again. She was moving on. She was laughing without him. She was building a future that did not include him. And that, he could not allow. The drinks came fast, one after the other, drowning out the voices in his head, but never quite silencing them. His hands shook as he gripped the glass, his vision blurred, not from alcohol but from something far worse, obsession. Friends sat around him, uneasy, watching as he spiraled deeper. She was mine, he muttered under his breath, eyes dark, unfocused. She is ruining everything. She will regret this. He slurred the words, but the message was clear. Gladys Ricart would not wake up tomorrow and walk into the arms of another man. The messages she never saw. Somewhere in the city her phone buzzed. One message. Then another. Then another. Do you think you can just erase me? You will regret this. I hope you're ready for tomorrow. I am. They sat unread, ignored in the sea of love and celebration. A bride too busy being happy to notice the monster lurking in the shadows. Across the city, Gladys was glowing. Her bridesmaids surrounded her, their laughter filling the air. Music played softly, a toast was made, glasses clinking in celebration. She was in love. She was ready. She was stepping into a future where she would never again have to look over her shoulder. She danced. She laughed. She whispered excitedly about the dress waiting for her in the morning, about the moment she would walk down the aisle toward the man she loved. She did not know that, in a darkened room, Agustin Garcia was loading a gun. That with each bullet he whispered her name, sealing her fate. That while she slept, dreaming of her wedding day, he sat awake, drowning in hatred, staring at the weapon in his hands. His hands did not shake anymore. His decision had been made. If I can't have you, no one will. And in just a few hours, he would make sure of it. The morning sun rose like any other. The world moved forward, unaware that this day, this moment, was already unraveling toward tragedy. Inside a small home filled with love, excitement and promise, a bride prepared for the happiest day of her life. A morning filled with joy. The house buzzed with movement. Voices overlapped. Laughter spilled into the air like music. Hold still, Gladys. A bridesmaid giggled, adjusting the delicate fabric of her gown. The videographer captured everything, her mother smoothing out invisible wrinkles, her friends fixing her veil, her own hands trembling, but only with excitement. Today she would say I do. Today she would finally belong to the man who made her feel safe, cherished, adored. She looked in the mirror and for a moment she paused. Staring at her own reflection, a small, knowing smile crept onto her lips. This is it, she thought. This is my new beginning. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a storm was brewing. A black car rolled down the road, slow, steady, almost too calm. The man inside gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The gun sat on the passenger seat beside him, loaded, ready, waiting. Each heartbeat pounded like a drum in his chest. Each breath felt heavier than the last. She was supposed to be mine. She can't do this to me. She doesn't get to walk away. She doesn't get to be happy. 2 lives, 2 paths, 1 tragic collision. Back at the house, Gladys twirled in her dress, laughter echoing in the air, pure, full of light. In the car, Agustin clenched his jaw so tightly it ached, his pulse thundering in his ears, his world narrowing to a single thought: she had betrayed him. Back at the house, her bridesmaids fixed her veil, her mother whispered a blessing, her heart swelled with joy. In the car, his fingers curled around the gun, cold, unshaken, his mind made up. Love and death, both heading toward the same house. One was arriving for celebration. The other, for execution. A moment of fate. She stood before the mirror one last time, tilting her head as if sensing something, as if feeling something shift in the air around her. A pause. A breath. A fleeting moment of unease. Then a knock at the door. The laughter continued. The cameras kept rolling. No one knew that just outside, a storm had arrived. No one knew that the past was about to crash into the present with the force of a gunshot. No one knew that the bride would never make it to the altar. 2 lives, 2 paths, 1 tragic collision. Back at the house, Gladys twirled in her dress, laughter echoing in the air, pure, full of light. In the car, Agustin clenched his jaw so tightly it ached, his pulse thundering in his ears, his world narrowing to a single thought: she had betrayed him. Back at the house, her bridesmaids fixed her veil, her mother whispered a blessing, her heart swelled with joy. In the car, his fingers curled around the gun, cold, unshaken, his mind made up. Love and death, both heading toward the same house. One was arriving for celebration. The other, for execution. A moment of fate. She stood before the mirror one last time, tilting her head as if sensing something, as if feeling something shift in the air around her. A pause. A breath. A fleeting moment of unease. Then a knock at the door. The laughter continued. The cameras kept rolling. No one knew that just outside, a storm had arrived. No one knew that the past was about to crash into the present with the force of a gunshot. No one knew that the bride would never make it to the altar. The house was alive with joy. The air was thick with the scent of flowers, with the sound of laughter, with the warmth of love. Cameras rolled, capturing every smile, every embrace, every fleeting moment of happiness. Somewhere in the background, wedding bells rang softly, a melody of hope, of new beginnings, of forever. And then, the door burst open. The laughter died instantly. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned toward the front door. A man stood in the entryway, dressed in black, eyes burning with something dark, something beyond rage, beyond obsession. A gun in his hand, raised, steady, lethal. Agustin Garcia had arrived. For a split second there was silence. A stunned, breathless silence. The kind that grips the air right before a storm tears through everything in its path. Gladys stood in the center of the room, her white dress flowing, her hands still mid-adjustment on her veil. Her eyes met his. Recognition flickered. And then, fear. The kind of fear that grips the bones. That sends fire through the veins. That screams run, run, run. The first shot. Screams erupted. A guest knocked over a glass. The videographer's camera shook. The flower girl gasped, clutching her bouquet as petals tumbled to the floor. Gladys moved instinctively, desperately, but too late. The gun exploded in fire. A deafening crack split the air. A bullet tore into flesh. Gladys stumbled. Her hands grasped for something, anything, only to find nothing but empty space. The second shot. A scream of agony. The sound of impact, a body colliding with the floor. More screams. The flower girl's bouquet slipped from her hands, hitting the ground as red roses scattered like drops of blood. Gladys gasped, pain ripping through her, eyes wide with shock, chest rising and falling in sharp, ragged breaths. She tried to crawl, her fingers weakly clawing at the polished wood beneath her. But Augustin stepped closer. The third shot. A final, merciless gunshot. A lifeless gasp. Gladys' body jerked once. Then stilled. The wedding dress that had once symbolized love and hope was now soaked in crimson. The veil that had once been carefully placed on her head now lay beside her, untouched, forgotten. A bride, murdered in the very dress she was meant to be married in. Chaos erupts. Screams. So many screams. People pushed, stumbled, tripped over furniture. The wedding guests ran, colliding with each other, scrambling toward the door, trying to escape the nightmare unfolding before them. The flower girl sobbed, frozen in place, staring at the only bride she had ever seen lying motionless on the ground. Someone knocked over the wedding cake, white icing smeared across the floor, a twisted reflection of the blood pooling beside it. The camera that had once been capturing a love story was now capturing a crime scene. And in the center of it all, Agustin Garcia stood motionless, the gun still warm in his hand. His face blank, emotionless, as if he had done nothing at all, as if he were simply fulfilling something that was inevitable. His eyes never left her, the woman he once claimed to love, the woman he had just stolen from the world. And then, a whisper. Soft, cold, final. She was mine. A second later, a rush of bodies tackled and beat him up mercilessly. Wedding guests, family members, men who had just watched their friend, their daughter, their sister die. They pinned him to the ground, screaming, sobbing, cursing. He didn't resist. He didn't fight. He only stared ahead, as if in a trance, as if he had already accepted his fate. The sirens cut through the chaos, flashing red and blue against the walls where wedding decorations still hung. Officers stormed in, weapons drawn, voices sharp, orders barking through the air. Augustin was yanked to his feet, his arms twisted behind him, handcuffs clicking shut. Blood smeared across the floor as officers stepped through the crime scene. A crime scene that only minutes ago had been a place of joy. A bride dead. A wedding turned into a funeral. And a camera, still rolling, capturing the very moment love was murdered. Gladys Ricart never made it to the altar. She never spoke her vows. She never danced her first dance as a wife. Instead, she lay still, eyes closed, veil undone, dreams shattered. She had wanted love. Instead, she had become a name on a police report. But this is not where her story ends. This is not where justice stops. Because the man who took her life would soon face a courtroom. And the world would not forget the name of Gladys Ricart. The courtroom was silent. The walls, thick with history, had heard testimonies before. They had seen killers walk free. They had seen justice fail. But today, the world was watching. Not just for the law. Not just for a verdict. But for Gladys. At the defense table, Agustin Garcia sat, dressed in a suit, his face a mask of calculated sorrow. He did not look at the gallery where Gladys' family sat, their eyes hollow from grief, their bodies tense with rage. He did not look at the screen where a projector stood waiting, prepared to show the world the horror he had committed. Instead, he stared forward. His attorney stood, adjusting his tie, walking toward the jury with measured steps, rehearsed sincerity dripping from his voice. This was not a monster, he said. This was not a cold-blooded killer. He turned to Agustin, gesturing to him like a man pleading for mercy. This was a man consumed by love. A man who acted in the heat of passion. A murmur rippled through the courtroom, small, tense, barely contained fury. Gladys' family clenched their fists, their nails digging into their palms. Crime of passion. As if that would bring her back. The prosecution fires back. The district attorney rose, no hesitation, no doubt in her steps. She walked slowly, methodically, pausing in front of the jury with one sentence that shattered the defense's plea for sympathy. This was premeditated murder. Silence. A deep inhale from the jury. 5 days before the wedding, he bought a gun. 3 days before the wedding, he hired someone to follow her. One night before the wedding, he sent her threatening messages. And on the morning of the wedding, he walked into her house, pulled the trigger, and watched her die. This was not passion. This was not love. This was control. This was revenge. This was murder. One by one, the pieces fell into place. Surveillance footage. A screen flickered on. The jury watched as Agustin walked into a store 5 days before the murder. He placed a revolver on the counter. He paid in cash. He left, expression unreadable, steps firm, purpose clear. Wedding footage, now evidence of a crime. The air grew heavier as the prosecutor pressed play. A house full of life. The soft murmur of laughter. The bride twirling in her dress. Then, the door slamming open. A gun rising. A woman collapsing. A man standing over her, whispering his final words. She was mine. Witness testimonies. A bridesmaid sobbing on the stand, voice shaking as she recalled the moment she saw Gladys fall. Gladys' mother, clutching a rosary in trembling hands, whispering, "She was my only daughter. I was supposed to dance at her wedding, not bury her." A police officer recalling the moment they arrived, describing the blood pooling across white lace. The jury shifted. A few swallowed hard. One dabbed at their eyes. The weight of what they had seen could not be unseen. The jury deliberated for hours. The room, thick with anticipation, filled with restless movements, with shallow breaths, with prayers murmured under shaking lips. And then, the verdict was in. Everyone rose. The judge entered. The foreman stood. On the charge of first-degree murder, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. A sharp cry from the gallery. A sob, uncontrolled, raw, spilling out like an untamed wave. Gladys' family collapsed into each other, holding onto shoulders, gripping onto hands as if their own bodies could not hold them upright anymore. Some cried in relief. Others sat in silence, staring at the man who had stolen so much. But Agustin Garcia did not react. Not at first. Then a shift. A small movement. A tightening of his jaw. And for the first time since the trial began, his hands shook. Agustin Garcia, you have been found guilty of first-degree murder. You are hereby sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 30 years before parole eligibility. A gavel slammed down. Finality. Absolute and unchangeable. The chapter closed. Gladys Ricart was not there to hear her justice spoken. She was not there to see the man who took her life led away in chains. But her name echoed in the halls of that courthouse. Her name lived in the breath of every person who had fought for her. And when the doors opened, when the trial was over, when the cameras turned off, the world did not forget, because justice had spoken. But Gladys Ricart's story was far from over. It was only just beginning. If you are yet to subscribe, hit the subscribe button now. Turn on notifications and like this video. Because every case matters. Because justice isn't just about the past, it's about protecting the future. And because the stories we tell today could save a life tomorrow. Gladys Ricart did not get to walk down the aisle. She did not say her vows. She did not dance at her wedding. She did not wake up the next morning as a wife, wrapped in the arms of the man she loved. Her story should have ended in love. Instead, it ended in tragedy. But some stories refuse to be forgotten. Her name could have faded into the silence, lost in the sea of headlines, buried beneath the next tragedy. But it didn't, because Gladys Ricart became more than a victim. She became a symbol, a warning, a voice for those who never got the chance to speak. And from her death came a movement. 1 year after her murder, women gathered, not in mourning, not in quiet grief, but in defiance. Hundreds of women, dressed in white, a sea of wedding gowns flooding the streets, each step echoing the name of Gladys Ricart. A march, not to celebrate love, but to demand justice. To scream to the world that love should never come with bruises, that devotion should never come with fear, that marriage should never be a death sentence. And every year since, they march again. New faces, new voices, but the same message. We will not be silent. We will not forget. Gladys Ricart never got to finish her story, but she is not forgotten. Not by the women who march in her name. Not by the families who hear her story and recognize their own dangers in it. Not by the world that finally sees that love is not possession and passion is not control. Somewhere, another woman is living the same nightmare. Somewhere, another love is turning to violence. Somewhere, another Gladys Ricart is looking into the mirror, getting ready for her wedding, never knowing that danger is waiting just outside her door. But if we tell her story, if we keep saying her name, maybe, just maybe, we can save her before it's too late. Gladys Ricart did not get to walk down the aisle, but her legacy lives on. A reminder that love should never come with fear. A reminder that no one deserves to be controlled, to be stalked, to be threatened, to be hurt in the name of love. A reminder that we must listen, that we must act, that we must never ever turn away. This is not just a crime story. This is a call to action. For every woman who is still here. For every woman who still has time. For every woman who needs to hear this before she becomes the next tragedy. Say her name. Remember her face. And if you or someone you know is in danger, please don't wait, because tomorrow might be too late. Gladys Ricart's story is just one of many, one of too many. But if we continue to tell their stories, if we refuse to let them be forgotten, then maybe, just maybe, we can stop the next tragedy before it happens. This is why Crime Scene Chronicles exists. To bring you the untold, the unforgettable, the chilling truths hidden beneath the headlines. To give a voice to the victims. To uncover the darkness. To make sure no one ever says, we never saw it coming again. Subscribe to Crime Scene Chronicles. Turn on notifications and like this video. Because every case matters. Because justice isn't just about the past, it's about protecting the future. And because the stories we tell today could save a life tomorrow. Click that button now. Join us. And never look away from the truth.